As someone who focuses on cycle health, one of the questions I get asked a lot is what is the most common type of hormone disruption? Or what is the main reason that hormonal imbalance happens? Now, before I answer that question, I think one of the fundamentals that we need to, or at least that we should know, is how our hormones should normally cycle through, or what they should normally look like. Which is something that I wish I would have learned is when you're looking for why is my hormones out of balance, something that we should know is what our hormones would look like naturally. Now, to keep it simple, our cycle consists of more than just our periods, which is why I normally say our cycle health and not just our period health, because our period is only one facet of our cycle. You might be familiar with the four phases. So there's menses, or our period, the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase. Now, if you look at them hormonally, our cycle is actually divided into two main areas, which is the ones that are predominantly estrogen based. This is the part of our cycle where our main hormone is estrogen. And then there is the luteal phase where our main hormone is progesterone. Now, I'll have a diagram on the graph that shows you roughly what a normal cycle fluctuation would look like. But in essence, during our period, during our bleed, our hormone levels are actually at their lowest. And then as we progress through the follicular phase, they slowly start to increase up until there is a threshold. Around that threshold is when ovulation occurs. Now, after ovulation, estrogen kind of dips down a little bit, but there is still some estrogen being produced. But primarily in the luteal phase, progesterone is the dominant hormone. Now, we do want a good amount of estrogen to progesterone because these two hormones are interlinked in many different aspects of our body, because our body has hormone receptors throughout them, and they do require that estrogen to progesterone balance between these two hormones. Now, something that's really important to note is the middle part of our cycle, ovulation. Ovulation is actually the main event of our cycle. Now, I want to take a moment to mention that ovulation is so much more than for reproduction. It is how our body makes progesterone. So, revisiting ovulation, once estrogen hits that threshold or that peak, ovulation occurs. This ovulation window roughly takes about 24 to 48 hours, and then the egg gets reabsorbed back into the body. And then in the ovary, what is left over is a follicle. This follicle turns into a gland called the corpus luteum. And this gland is producing progesterone, which means in cases where ovulation isn't occurring or when ovulation is delayed, we'll talk more about that in a second, that means that there is going to be more time in the estrogen phase where our body is producing more estrogen than when ovulation occurs, and then we're producing progesterone. So that progesterone phase will relatively be shortened because most of the time is spent in the estrogen phase. That is how we end up with things like estrogen dominance. So once again, to be able to make progesterone, we need to ovulate to be able to actually enter the luteal phase. If we're not ovulating, that means that we are kind of stuck in the follicular phase. And once again, in the follicular phase, we are producing more and more estrogen. So once again, ideally, we want an equal amount of our cycle to be dedicated to estrogen production and then to progesterone production to have healthy, balanced hormones. Now, back to the original question, what is the most common type of hormone disruption, or what is most likely to imbalance our hormones? And the answer to that is chronic stress. Now, chronic stress does get a little bit of a bad rap because we all know the detrimental effects of chronic stress. But chronic stress is more of a survival mechanism, and it is our own body's intelligence kind of conflicting with modern day life. So if you think about it, if you are chronically stressed, so there is deadlines, there are fights with your partner, maybe exams, work, things like that. There can also be internal stress, so over exercising, undernourishment, chronically being sick. All of these things can indirectly signal to your body that it is not a safe space. Therefore, that we should push back or just outright delay ovulation altogether until it is safer to do so. Because when ovulation occurs, there is the potential for a pregnancy to occur. So therefore, if we are chronically stressed, that is signaling to our body that it is not a safe space, which is how hormone imbalances can come about. Now, how can that show up in a cycle, or how do you know if ovulation is being delayed? Now, a really good way to see this is with quote unquote late periods, where our periods aren't actually late because our luteal phase is pretty stagnant. But what actually fluctuates in our cycle is the follicular phase. So pre-ovulation is what fluctuates because as your body is ramping up to ovulation, if it doesn't feel safe enough to ovulate, then it will kind of push that out indefinitely until you then feel safe enough to ovulate. Now, once again, the issue with that is that we have more time being spent in the estrogen phase, producing estrogen, than we are in the counterbalance of that, which is progesterone. This then leads to different cycle lengths, when one cycle can be like 30 days long, and the next one can be like 38 days long, and the next one can be 24 days long. These different cycle variations indicate that ovulation is occurring at different times because our body, once again, doesn't feel safe enough to ovulate consistently. Okay, so that is the impact hormonally in what's going on our hormones specifically, that can impact and lead to hormone imbalances. But unfortunately, stress does impact many different other areas in the body. So some of them can be the nervous system, being stuck in that fight or flight mode. When we're kind of stuck on edge and we're flustered, and we can get into maybe some feelings of anxiety and restlessness. These kind of things can also impact your sleep quality, because if you are feeling overall restless, then that means that there is maybe other parts of the day where you are getting a little bit more energy. That typically is at nighttime, so that has issues with sleep quality. Once again, insomnia can be an issue, which when we have compromised sleep cycles, then that can then further on lead to other cycle imbalances because we're not getting that good quality sleep. Other big areas that can be impacted by chronic stress is gut issues, gut imbalances, which can then lead to nutrient deficiencies. That's because chronic stress can lead to gut dysbiosis or a gut imbalance, when chronic stress leads to more bad bacteria, quote unquote, than good bacteria. What then occurs is that this bad bacteria isn't able to absorb the nutrients from the food that we're eating. So even though we're eating all the right things, it can be that our body isn't able to absorb those things, which leads to nutrient deficiencies, which means that we have less building blocks to create those hormones, which the main building blocks to create our hormones is fat. So healthy fats, cholesterol is what makes our hormones. And if our body isn't able to absorb those nutrients, or if we're not eating enough healthy fats, then we're not getting those building blocks to those hormones. Another main issue with chronic stress impacting our digestive health is overburdening the liver. Now, our liver is the one that is in charge of processing everything that we come into contact with. Everything that we eat, drink, everything that we expose onto our skin is absorbed and then processed by our liver. And then our liver is also in charge of processing our use of an excess hormone, which also includes cortisol, the stress hormone. So if there is more stress that your body needs to then work through and process, then that kind of gives a backlog to other things that also need to be processed by the liver. Other things that stress can impact is, of course, our mental health, immune health, our cardiovascular system. So honestly, stress would probably impact every aspect of us. So it is especially important to be on the lookout to stress levels, especially if you are dealing with hormonal imbalances. So then that begs the question, how exactly do we mitigate or minimize stress? And that will look differently because we are all very different and unique. So some of the things that have helped me the most as someone that does struggle with chronic stress and hormonal imbalances is finding little habits or things that you enjoy that let you kind of disconnect from day-to-day life. Once again, that will look differently for different people. Some of the hobbies that I've really enjoyed are things like drawing, painting, being out in nature, just enjoying nature with my pets. I currently now have 3 new chickies that are in the coop just right behind my house, and I really enjoy just going out there and just watching them frolic and free roam. Meditating, breath work, coloring, all of these things can drown out day-to-day struggles and kind of get you back into living in the moment, which is kind of the idea when we are looking for these new hobbies. Now, as an herbalist, I will also recommend a couple of different herbs that have also helped me kind of settle back into my body and not be so in my head. So some of those herbs can be things like lemon balm is really good, tulsi is really good, chamomile. All of these are herbs that are generally really safe, really gentle, and kind of help ease the mind a little bit so it's not just racing nonstop. And then if you can afford it, get external support, things like acupuncture, massage, facials, going out with friends. All of these things, once again, helps us settle into our bodies a little bit more and not be so much in our head and be worrying about the next thing or being just chronically stressed on a daily day basis. So hopefully you learned something new. Let me know down below what your favorite way of de-stressing at the end of the day is. Now, if you want more ideas on how to balance your hormones naturally, then I do have a starter guide on how to heal your cycle naturally. I'll have that link down below so you can check that out later. All right, and I'll be seeing you next time.